a anthology called Love and War in Afghanistan. And this guy wrote an essay about this. He wrote an essay that I'm just reading part of. How's that? Better? Closer? All right. Where do you put the book? Okay. That talked about his life under the Soviets, under the Taliban, and then he starts. After September 11th, the world finally understood the mistakes it had made in Afghanistan. America realized that it had been a huge miscalculation to support the Mujahideen and then turn a blind eye to the Taliban abuses. They mercifully freed us from those cursed Taliban, but in the process caused us many anxious days and nights. In November 2001, after Mazar-e-Sharif and other areas in the northeast had fallen to Northern Alliance advances, thousands of Taliban soldiers decided to regroup in Kunduz. Feel free to correct my pronunciation. During this time, you could see Taliban who were Chechens, Arabs, Pakistanis, Uzbeks, and many others right here on the streets of the city. All night, American B-52s circled overhead, dropping bombs. Loud bangs were heard across the city as deadly payloads were delivered. One night, a huge explosion struck so close to our house that all of our windows and mirrors were instantly shattered. We thought the bomb had fallen right on us and that we would soon be dead. For about 10 nights, we were subjected to such intensive bombing that we had no idea if we would survive to see the next day. The battle in Kunduz ended a lot faster than most of us had feared. Many of the enemy combatants were from Pakistan, and they were allowed safe passage to return home. I think the disagreement is what brought such a quick conclusion to the fighting up north. Thank God we managed to survive another close brush with death. When the Taliban and the terrorists fled Kunduz, or blended back into the local population, we felt as though we'd been freed from an indeterminate prison sentence and finally had a choice to rejoin the world. We were full of optimism for the future. After the agreements in Bonn in December 2001, President Karzai began to lead the interim government. But our hopes for the future were quickly deflated when we saw on television Karzai's first official meeting with the 29 new cabinet ministers and other high-level government officials. Among them were many familiar faces. They were the same leaders whose hands had been soaked in the blood of Afghans and had caused us all so much suffering. There were many people we saw who should have been prosecuted for crimes against humanity rather than rewarded with government posts. The government immediately pledged they would appoint highly educated and well-trained people to the most important positions. I was buoyed again with optimism. It was a good decision after all. Oh, that I hadn't become a flutist. He thought of being a musician. But as we have seen, the Karzai government has been in power for more than 2 years, more now, and has done little to promote educated people into prominent positions of authority. Not much has really changed, at least outside of Kabul. We see and we know that there are international peacekeeping forces around, but thus far they're only in northeastern Afghanistan and Kabul. Most Afghans, including me, don't believe that this peace is stable. So long as these criminal officials are occupying high-level government posts, we all know that this is not a real peace. It's only an illusion. That's why women here in Kunduz, including brave women like Fatima, that's his wife, are not yet prepared to take off their burqas. They are still fearful. The women and their husbands and fathers know that government officials from the city and provincial level all the way up to Kabul are drenched in blood. Another sign that the criminal commanders are still in control is the rapidly expanding opium and heroin trade. Every step of the process, the growth, harvesting, transportation, and processing of opium into heroin is overseen by those who have political power. And in this way, they manage to exercise control over the whole society. These elites are in contact with worldwide drug cartels, which transport the heroin all around the world, even to the shores of America. The heroin production and distribution is inextricably linked to terrorism, and extremely corrupt government system. It will take a lot of time and work to rebuild the shattered infrastructure of Afghanistan after 23 long years of war. But what is less talked about is how to rebuild our shattered psychology. An entire generation has been lost to these useless wars. Middle-aged Afghans never had a chance to experience youth. Young people never had a childhood. If one were to diagnose the entire Afghan population, we could say that all of us, our children, our youth, our elderly, all of us suffer from some sort of psychological problems as a result of these wars. Thanks.
Thank you, Janet. So now we're going to begin the speech by Dr. Martin Luther King called Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. We're going to do a few sections of it, and then we're going to switch to some other writings, and then we'll close with the words of Dr. King again. So our first speaker will be reading. This speech was delivered on the 4th of April, 1967, at a meeting of clergy and laity concerned about the war in Vietnam at Riverside Church in New York City.